Welcome to the IELTS Focus. The purpose of this deep dive is exclusively to decode the IELTS writing test for you. You are going to learn exactly how examiners evaluate Task 1 and Task 2 using the official public band descriptors to understand the anatomy of a high-scoring written response. Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a massive stack of source material today detailing the core blueprint of the writing exam. To kick things off, help us understand the very first fork in the road for a test taker. I mean, the choice between the academic test and the general training test. Is it just, matter of different vocabulary, or are we looking at two completely different beasts?
They are fundamentally different beasts, particularly when you look at how the first half of the test is actually constructed. The choice between academic, which we call AC, and general training, or GT, that dictates your entire preparation strategy. The academic test is specifically engineered to measure the English language proficiency required for a higher education environment. So the tasks are strictly designed for individuals entering undergraduate or postgraduate studies, or professionals seeking registration in fields like medicine or engineering. On the flip side, the general training test measures proficiency in a practical, everyday social context. It is the standard requirement for individuals who wish to migrate to English-speaking countries for work experience or training programs. The critical divergence happens immediately in Task 1.
So if academic Task 1 is all about data and charts, what are they throwing at the general training candidates? Are they analyzing data too, or is it a completely different skill set?
It's a completely different skill set, one based on social survival rather than academic analysis. In the academic Task 1, you are confronted with a visual representation of complex data. It could be a line graph, a bar chart, a pie chart, a data table, or even a mechanical diagram.
Like a schematic.
Exactly. A classic example from the official materials involves describing the stages and equipment used in the cement-making process, and then detailing how that cement is subsequently used to produce concrete. You have to look at this visual abstract information and describe, summarize, or explain it entirely in your own words, maintaining a purely objective academic tone. But for general training Task 1, there are no graphs. Instead, you're presented with an everyday situation and asked to write a letter.
A letter? That sounds almost archaic in the age of instant messaging. What kind of situations are we actually talking about here?
They simulate practical life scenarios you would genuinely encounter when living abroad. You might be asked to write a personal letter to a friend apologizing for missing a party, a semi-formal letter to a landlord complaining about a broken heating system, or a strictly formal letter to a company requesting information about a job advertisement. The challenge isn't analyzing data.
It's the tone.
Right, it's adopting the correct tone. Personal, semi-formal, or formal based on the specific situational prompt.
That makes perfect sense. But then we arrive at Task 2, the essay. From what I gather in the sources, Task 2 is required for both the academic and general training tracks. Does the essay format change depending on which track you are taking, or is it a standardized hurdle for everyone?
Structurally, it is essentially the same hurdle. In both AC and GT, you are prompted to write a full essay in response to a specific point of view, an argument, or a societal problem. You have to introduce the topic, present your ideas in structured paragraphs, and provide a reasoned conclusion. The only subtle distinction lies in the expected style and topic complexity.
Meaning the academic one is much more rigid.
Yes, the academic essay must be strictly semi-formal to formal. The topics are usually weightier. Think global environmental policies or the economics of education. The general training essay allows for a slightly more personal, accessible style, and the topics tend to revolve around more immediate social issues, like the impact of television on children or the benefits of living in the city versus the countryside. But the underlying mechanics of how you are graded on that essay remain identical.
Speaking of mechanics, let's talk about the constraints candidates are under. The sources outline a very rigid framework for time and word count. You have a total of 60 minutes. Task 1 requires a minimum of 150 words in 20 minutes, and Task 2 requires a minimum of 250 words in 40 minutes. But there's a massive caveat in the source material regarding how these two tasks are weighted. It seems like spending equal energy on both is a strategic disaster.
It is the most common tactical error candidates make. Task 2 contributes twice as much to your final writing score as Task 1. Let me emphasize that. It is weighted double.
Double! Wow!
Examiners constantly see scripts where a candidate has poured 35 minutes into writing a masterful 300-word analysis of a cement-making diagram for Task 1, leaving themselves only 25 minutes to rush through a fragmented, incomplete essay for Task 2. Because Task 2 carries double the weight, a brilliant Task 1 cannot mathematically save your overall band score if your Task 2 falls apart. The 20-minute and 40-minute division isn't just a suggestion. It is the optimal mathematical strategy for maximizing your points based on the weighting.
I always see people debating the physical reality of taking the test now. You can choose between the traditional paper-based test or the computer-delivered test. The computer version obviously includes a word count function on the screen and a dynamic timer, which sounds like a massive tactical advantage compared to frantically counting lines of handwriting. Is there a hidden catch to the computer-delivered format?
What's fascinating here is how the computer-delivered format actively works against you if you don't adjust your preparation strategy. Yes, the timer and word counter are brilliant tools. But think about how you normally type on a computer. You are relying on a massive, invisible safety net.
Spell check.
Exactly. When you take the actual computer-delivered IELTS exam, all spell check and grammar check functions are completely disabled. There are no red squiggly lines under your misspelled words. There are no blue lines telling you that you missed a comma.
Oh, that is terrifying. We are so conditioned to just type quickly and let the software clean up our mess.
Exactly the problem. If you practice at home using Microsoft Word or Google Docs with autocorrect turned on, you are building a false sense of security regarding your lexical resource and grammatical accuracy. You might think you were a Band 8 speller, but you are actually a Band 6 speller being propped up by software. The only way to simulate the real test environment is to disable all spelling and grammar checks on your word processor during practice. Type your response raw. Then, when your 60 minutes are up, enable the checks to analyze what errors you naturally made. That is the only way to expose your true weaknesses before test day.
That is a phenomenal practice tip. Before we get into the psychological profile of the examiner, let's establish what these band scores actually mean in the real world. We constantly hear about people needing a 6.5 or a 7.0. Our sources link the 9-band scale to the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. For someone applying to a university or trying to get a visa, what is the practical difference between a 6.5 and a 7.0?
The difference can be the deciding factor in an acceptance letter. The 9-band scale ranges from a 1, indicating a non-user of the language, up to a 9, which represents an expert user with complete natural control. When we map this to the CER scale, the sources indicate that an IELTS 6.5 sits right on the borderline between B2, which is upper intermediate, and C1, which is advanced.
And universities don't like borderline scores.
Precisely. Because 6.5 is a borderline score, it presents a risk to institutions. If a university program is highly linguistically demanding, say, a master's degree in literature or law, they need a high degree of confidence that you are firmly in the C1 bracket. Therefore, they will set their minimum requirement at a 7.0. A 6.5 might be perfectly adequate for a course with less heavy reading and writing demands, perhaps in certain technical or mathematical fields.
And I imagine it fluctuates wildly based on professional registration as well. A nurse moving to Canada probably faces different hurdles than a computer programmer moving to the UK.
The requirements are incredibly specific to the communication needs of the profession. For instance, medical professionals, like nurses migrating to Canada, are often required to achieve significantly higher band scores in their speaking and writing modules, because precise communication in those areas is literally a matter of life and death. Conversely, a teaching regulatory body in Australia might demand exceptionally high scores in speaking and listening to ensure the candidate can manage a dynamic classroom environment.
Okay, the stage is set. We understand the format, the timing traps, and the real-world stakes. Now, let's get into the mind of the person holding the red pen. The sources detail the examiner's secret workflow, the actual 4-step marking logic they employ the moment they open a test paper. Step 1 is identify the task. This seems obvious. Don't they just read the essay and start judging the vocabulary?
That is the assumption most candidates make, and it's why so many fail. The examiner does not care how beautiful your vocabulary is when they first look at your paper. Step 1 is entirely diagnostic. They dissect the prompt. They ask, how many distinct parts are there to this question? Does it ask the candidate to provide an opinion? Does it ask for specific solutions to a problem? Are they supposed to discuss both sides of an argument? The examiner is essentially creating a checklist based on the prompt.
So they're checking off boxes before they even grade your English.
Yes. If a prompt includes 3 distinct aspects, the candidate must address all 3. If you write a grammatically flawless, philosophically profound essay, but you miss one of the questions embedded in the prompt, your score for task response drops instantly. You are graded on your ability to follow complex instructions before you're graded on your language.
So what does this all mean for the grading sequence? Our sources outline Step 2 as score in the official order. Examiners apparently grade the 4 criteria in a very rigid sequence. task achievement for task 1 or task response for task 2 first, followed by coherence and cohesion, then lexical resource, and finally grammatical range and accuracy. Why is grammar evaluated dead last? I feel like grammar is what people stress about the most.
It's evaluated last because grammar is merely the vehicle for your ideas. If the vehicle's empty, it doesn't matter how shiny it is. The official sequence reflects a hierarchy of communication. First, did you answer the question? That's task response. Second, did you organize your answer logically? That's coherence and cohesion. Third, did you use the right words to express those ideas? That's lexical resource. And finally, did you construct the sentences accurately? That's grammar.
So if the argument is terrible, the grammar can't save it.
Exactly. If your task response is a failure because you went entirely off topic, the examiner cannot logically give you a high overall score just because you use sophisticated relative clauses and flawless passive voice. Flawless grammar wrapped around a failed argument is still a failed essay.
That makes total sense when you frame it as a hierarchy of communication. Step 3 is match the descriptor. The sources are very firm that examiners do not just feel out a score. They don't look at an essay and think, yeah, this feels like a 7. They are using a highly detailed band descriptor table. How rigid is this matching process?
It is absolute. The examiner is not comparing your essay to the other essays they read that day. They are comparing it strictly against the published rubric. They look at the specific positive features listed in the descriptors for each band. For example, to award a band 7 in lexical resource, they must actively find evidence that the writer uses less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation. They're essentially ticking boxes. Which band does the script most closely match based on the documented evidence? It removes the subjectivity from the grading process.
But the matching process has a dark side, which brings us to step 4. Check negative features. The sources call this the ceiling rule, and it sounds like an absolute nightmare for test takers. It implies that you could have band 9 skills but get trapped at a band 5. How exactly does a ceiling work in this context?
A ceiling is a hard cap placed on your score based on a specific, non-negotiable failure, regardless of how brilliant the rest of your writing is. The examiner actively hunts for these negative features. The rubric dictates that certain omissions prevent a script from moving higher. Let's take paragraphing. The rules state that you must use paragraphs to logically separate your ideas. If you write a 300-word essay that flows beautifully, uses university-level vocabulary, and has perfect punctuation, but you write it as one single, massive block of text without a single paragraph break, your coherence and cohesion score is mathematically limited to a maximum of band 5.
Wait, really? A single formatting choice can instantly knock out 40% of your potential score for that section?
Yes. It doesn't matter if you are a native-speaking English professor. No paragraphs equals a band 5 ceiling for that criterion.
That is brutal. Are there other ceilings like that?
Definitely. Another prime example is found in academic task 1. Your job is to describe a chart or graph. If you describe the trends beautifully, saying the numbers rose significantly, then fell sharply, but you provide no actual data from the chart, meaning you never mention specific numbers, dates, or percentages to support your description, your task achievement score is strictly capped at band 5.
Because you didn't actually report the data.
Right. The examiner asks, is there data? If the answer is no, the ceiling drops. It requires a massive mindset shift for learners. You aren't just trying to show off your best English. Your primary job is to actively avoid triggering the negative features that place a hard ceiling on your score.
That is sobering. With that brutal workflow in mind, we need to dive deep into Section 3. Decoding the 4 assessment criteria. Let's start with the first hurdle. Task achievement for Task 1 and task response for Task 2. Our sources highlight a massive, almost invisible pitfall called the plural rule. Break this down for us because it sounds like a trick question.
It isn't a trick, it's a test of precise reading comprehension. The plural rule is a classic logic check built into the grading rubric. Often, a Task 2 prompt will ask you to discuss the measures, causes, or reasons behind a phenomenon. Notice that those words are plural. If a prompt asks for solutions to urban crowding, and you write an incredibly profound 250-word analysis detailing one single, highly effective solution, perhaps a revolutionary public transit system, your task response score will be limited to a band 5 or 6, depending on the severity of the omission.
Just because you only gave one solution instead of 2.
Exactly. Because the prompt asked for solutions, plural. By only providing one, you've only partially addressed the task. A plural keyword means multiple distinct ideas are mandatory.
Let's run a stress test on this with the specific multi-part prompt provided in the source material. It's a classic IELTS trap. The prompt is, increasing the price of petrol is the best way to solve growing traffic and pollution problems. To what extent do you agree or disagree? What other measures do you think might be effective? If I'm sitting in the exam room, how do I dissect that to avoid hitting a ceiling?
You have to approach it like a surgeon. First, isolate the premise. The prompt explicitly mentions two distinct problems, traffic and pollution. You must address the impact on both traffic and pollution in your essay. If you only talk about how expensive petrol reduces traffic jams, but you completely ignore the environmental pollution aspect, your task response immediately drops because you missed half the premise.
Okay, that's step one.
Second, isolate the questions. There's an opinion question. To what extent do you agree or disagree? You must make your position on price increases explicitly clear. Then there is a secondary question. What other measures might be effective? You must answer this. Finally, apply the plural rule. It asks for measures. You cannot just suggest building more bike lanes. You must offer at least two distinct alternative measures, perhaps bike lanes and subsidizing public transport. If you forget pollution, or if you only offer one alternative measure, you trigger a penalty for an incomplete response.
It's almost like a legal contract. You have to satisfy every single clause.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the second criterion. Coherence and cohesion, or CC. I understand coherence is about the logical flow of ideas, but cohesion always trips people up. It's the use of linking devices, pronouns, and conjunctions. How does the examiner judge the difference between someone who is okay at linking ideas and someone who is an expert?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, coherence and cohesion is really about the invisible architecture of your writing. At the lower bands, like a 5 or a 6, cohesion is explicitly described in the rubric as mechanical or faulty.
Mechanical, like you can actually see the gears turning.
Exactly. A band 6 writer relies heavily on obvious signposts. They start paragraph 1 with firstly, paragraph 2 starts with secondly, paragraph 3 starts with moreover. The conclusion starts with to sum up. The linking words are there, but they stand out awkwardly. They draw attention to themselves. It feels like someone following a template. But as you move up the bands, the cohesion becomes subtler. At band 9, the descriptor uses a fascinating phrase. It states that the writer uses cohesion in such a way that it attracts no attention.
Invisible cohesion. That is a brilliant concept. It's like good CGI in a movie. If you notice the special effects, they're bad. If the effects are perfect, you just believe the dragon is real. You don't see the pixels.
That is the perfect analogy. A band 9 writer uses referencing, pronouns, and subtle transitional phrases to guide the reader through a complex argument so naturally that the reader never notices the linguistic glue holding it all together. You are never jarred by a clunky, furthermore. The ideas just effortlessly cascade into one another.
Let's talk about the third criterion, lexical resource, or LR. This evaluates vocabulary range, precision, and spelling. Now, the sources highlight something that causes a lot of anxiety: typographical errors. If I'm typing fast on the computer-delivered test and my finger slips, does the examiner know it's a typo, or do they punish me for bad spelling?
The rubric is unforgiving here. Typographical errors count strictly as spelling errors. The examiner cannot guess your intent. They can only grade what is on the screen or paper. If you type te instead of the, it is a spelling error. If these errors accumulate or if they cause strain for the reader trying to decipher your meaning, your LR score will be dragged down.
So spelling is the foundation. But to reach the upper echelon, say a band 7 or 8, what are examiners looking for beyond just not making mistakes? The sources mention collocation. What does that actually look like in practice?
Collocation is the hallmark of natural language use. It refers to words that naturally go together in English. To get a band 7 or higher, you must show an awareness of style and collocation, using less common or idiomatic language. It is not about memorizing 10 massive obscure words and forcing them into your essay. It is about precision.
So it's not about sounding like a thesaurus.
Right. Source material provides a great example of this. A lower band candidate might write about a big short circuit in an electrical device. A higher band candidate will write about a major short circuit. Both convey the idea, but major collocates naturally with a short circuit. Big short circuit sounds slightly off to a native ear. Elevating your score is about demonstrating that you know exactly which words naturally pair together.
Precision over complexity. I like that. Finally, the fourth criterion, grammatical range and accuracy, or GRA. This evaluates the variety of your sentence structures and, obviously, how many mistakes you make. The distinction the sources draw between the higher bands here is incredibly granular. How do you separate a band 7 from a band 8 and a band 8 from a band 9 just based on grammar?
The distinction lies entirely in consistency and the nature of the errors. The wording in the official descriptors is highly deliberate. For a band 7, a writer frequently produces error-free sentences. They have solid control, they use complex structures, but you expect to see several grammatical mistakes throughout the essay. They are frequent, but not dominant. Now, look at Band 8. A Band 8 writer produces a majority of error-free sentences. The balance is shifted. More than half of the sentences are flawless. They make only very occasional errors.
And Band 9, is it absolute robotic perfection, like no mistakes allowed?
Not at all. A Band 9 writer produces consistently accurate structures, with rare minor errors occurring only as slips. A slip is a crucial concept. A slip is not a systemic misunderstanding of English grammar. It's a momentary lapse, like accidentally dropping an S off a plural noun in a highly complex 40-word sentence. It is the kind of minor error that even a highly educated native speaker might make when drafting a document quickly. The examiner recognizes the difference between a candidate who doesn't understand the past perfect tense and a master who just had a slip of the pen.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've spent a lot of time discussing what to do right, but our sources dedicate a massive amount of space to detailing what candidates do wrong. They outline 12 specific problem areas and negative features that routinely drag test takers' scores down. I want to put these under a microscope, starting with the first one, underlength responses. We already established there is a minimum word count, 150 for task 1, 250 for task 2, but if there is no maximum limit, why is writing too little such a severe penalty? Does the examiner just dock points for missing the quota?
It's much deeper than a simple quota penalty. If you write only 180 words for task 2, you are penalized across multiple criteria simultaneously. First, your task response suffers because you simply haven't generated enough volume to adequately develop and support your arguments. You can't deeply analyze a complex global issue in 180 words. Second, your lexical resource and grammatical range suffer. The examiner needs a sufficiently large sample size of your writing to judge your flexibility. If you write a very short essay, you haven't given them enough evidence of complex sentence structures or varied vocabulary to award a high band. You are starving the examiner of the data they need to give you a good score.
But on the flip side, is it possible to write too much? If I write 500 words for task 2, am I guaranteeing a higher score because I'm giving them so much evidence?
Absolutely not. While there's no official maximum limit, writing extremely long responses carries a severe hidden risk. Error density. Yes. The longer you write under intense time pressure, the more fatigued you become. The more you write, the higher the mathematical probability that you will make grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, or lose the logical thread of your argument. A tight, highly controlled 280-word essay will almost always score higher than a rambling, error-riddled 450-word essay. More words just gives you more rope to hang yourself with.
That is a terrifying metaphor, but highly effective. Let's look at problem area number 2, missing bullet points. This is specific to general training task 1. You are given a scenario and 3 bullet points to cover in your letter. What happens if I write a beautiful letter, but I casually skip the 3rd bullet point?
You hit a brutal ceiling. The examiner notes in our sources are explicit about this. If you skip even one of the required bullet points, your task achievement score is hard-capped at Band 4. The logic is that the bullet points dictate the core purpose of the letter. If the prompt tells you to write to a manager to explain an absence, apologize, and suggest how to cover your shifts, and you forget to suggest how to cover your shifts, the overall purpose of your letter is deemed incomplete and unclear. A Band 4 is considered a near failure for that criterion, regardless of your grammar or vocabulary.
Problem area 3 is inappropriate format. This sounds straightforward. Task 1, academic, is a report, GT is a letter, task 2 is an essay. But how do people mess this up in practice? Are they writing poems?
They aren't writing poems, but they are importing business writing habits into an academic test. The most common violation of format is the use of bullet points, numbered lists, or subheadings within an essay or report. Candidates think, I have 3 solutions, I'll just list them out with bullet points to make it clear.
Which makes perfect sense in a corporate email.
Exactly. But the IELTS test strictly requires connected, continuous prose. If you use dot points or subheadings anywhere in your response, you are violating the fundamental format of an essay or formal report. If you do this extensively, the rubric dictates your score is capped at a Band 3 or 4. You cannot just copy chunks of the prompt and list bullet points beneath it. It fundamentally fails the requirement to demonstrate coherence and cohesion through paragraphing and linking sentences.
Let's talk about tone. Problem area 4 is inappropriate tone, which is massive for the general training letters. How bad does tone deafness have to be to trigger a penalty?
It happens when the tone wildly contradicts the required format. Let's say the prompt tells you to write a formal letter of complaint to a company director, and it explicitly instructs you to begin with, Dear Sir, Madam. That establishes a rigid, formal, neutral boundary. If a candidate starts slipping into colloquial, friendly language like writing, "I miss you guys, how are your family doing?" in the middle of a corporate complaint, the tone is fundamentally broken.
That would be incredibly awkward to read.
It is. Conversely, candidates sometimes become overly aggressive in complaint letters, using threatening language like, "You better change these policies soon, or else." Mixing formal conventions with overly casual or highly emotional language shows a lack of control over register. Our sources confirm this specific inconsistency limits the task achievement score to a band 4.
Next is a trap specific to academic task 1, insufficient overview or data. I know task 1 requires describing a chart. What constitutes an overview and why is omitting it so devastating?
An overview is the single most important paragraph in academic task 1. It is not an introduction where you just rewrite the prompt. An overview is a high-level summary of the most significant overarching trends, main stages, or major differences shown in the visual data without getting bogged down into the specific numbers yet. Think of it as the executive summary. If you simply dive into listing the data point by point without ever zooming out to provide that general summary, the rubric dictates your task achievement is capped at band 5.
But the sources also say you can be penalized for the opposite problem, giving an overview but no data.
Yes. If you write a lovely summary saying, "The profits of company A rose significantly while the profits of company B fell," but you fail to include the actual numbers. You never mention that company A rose from $1 million to $5 million. You have failed the task of reporting the data. You must anchor your descriptions with the specific numbers, percentages, or dates provided in the chart. Failing to include data also results in a band 5 cap.
Problem number 6 is producing tangential or off-topic responses. This happens in task 2. The source provides a fascinating example. The prompt asks, are children brought up in families without large amounts of money better prepared for adult life than children of wealthy parents? How does a candidate go off topic here?
By locking onto a keyword and ignoring the actual question, a stressed candidate sees the words money and wealthy parents. They panic, reach into their memory, and pull out a pre-memorized essay they read online about the general pros and cons of being rich. They spend 250 words discussing how money buys better health care, but can lead to greed. They completely fail to connect the concept of wealth to the specific core issue, which is being prepared for adult life.
Oh, I see. They just wrote an essay about money.
Right, because they are writing generally about wealth, but not specifically about adult preparation, the essay is deemed tangential. It skirts the edge of the topic without addressing the core question. This drops the task response to a band 4.
And what if they write a completely memorized essay that has nothing to do with the prompt at all? Say, the prompt is about wealth, and they write about the environment.
If a response is totally memorized and completely off topic, the examiner recognizes it immediately. It receives a band 1 for task response. The test is highly calibrated to detect and punish rote memorization.
Finally, we have to revisit the lack of paragraphs. We touched on this during the ceiling rule, but it is such a catastrophic structural failure it bears repeating. Why is a wall of text so heavily penalized?
Because paragraphing is the physical manifestation of logical thought. In Task 2, the rules require you to present a clear central topic within each paragraph. One paragraph might be your first solution. The next paragraph is your second solution. If you do not use paragraphs, or if your paragraphing is completely illogical, like breaking paragraphs randomly in the middle of a sentence, your coherence and cohesion score drops immediately and irrevocably to a band 5. It acts as an absolute barrier. You could write with the vocabulary of a poet and the grammar of a linguist, but if you don't hit the enter key to separate your ideas, you fail the coherence test.
To really solidify all these abstract rules and mechanics, I want to move into Section 5 and look at the actual evidence. We have 2 specific case studies in band scoring drawn directly from the examiner's actual notes. We get to see exactly how these criteria apply to real scripts. Let's start with case study 1. This is a general training task 1 letter. The candidate is complaining about a broken microwave. This script received an overall score of 7.5. Let's break down the individual criteria.
Let's look at the breakdown. The examiner awarded a band 7 for task achievement. The writer clearly stated the purpose of the letter and addressed the bullet points, although the examiner noted the tone became slightly demanding at the very end, which kept it from an 8 or 9. For lexical resource, they scored a very strong band 8. The examiner praised their wide, formal complaint vocabulary. They used excellent collocations like expedite the process and noted the microwave was under warranty. They made only minor occasional errors in word choice. For instance, writing a big short circuit instead of the more natural major short circuit. For grammatical range and accuracy, they also scored an 8, producing a wide variety of mostly error-free, complex sentences.
Okay, wait. They have an 8 in lexical resource, they have an 8 in grammar, they have a 7 in task achievement. Why didn't they get an 8 overall? Where'd they bleed points?
They bled points entirely because of coherence and cohesion. The examiner gave them a 7 for CC strictly because of formatting. The logical progression of the letter was excellent. The linky words were deployed correctly, but the candidate wrote the entire letter as one massive continuous block of text. There were no paragraph breaks.
You're kidding. A band 8 level writer got dragged down to a 7.5 overall just because they didn't press the return key.
Exactly. If that writer had simply hit the enter key twice to create a distinct opening paragraph, a body paragraph for the explanation, and a closing paragraph for the demand, their coherence and cohesion score would likely have risen to an 8, and their overall score could have easily been an 8. It is a painful, tangible lesson in how mechanical formatting constraints can override linguistic brilliance.
That is heartbreaking for the candidate, but a vital lesson for our listeners. Let's contrast that tragedy with absolute mastery. Case study 2 is an examiner's breakdown of a perfect Band 9 essay. This essay is responding to that complex, multi-part petrol prices and traffic prompt we dissected earlier. How did this writer achieve a 9 across the board?
They achieved it through systematic, relentless precision. For task response, the examiner noted they fully and equally addressed both the traffic and the pollution aspects of the prompt. They explicitly stated their position. They clearly rejected the idea that raising petrol prices was the best solution. And crucially, they satisfied the plural rule by offering highly specific, well-developed alternative measures, such as detailing the implementation of a Melbourne-style public tram system. They left no part of the prompt unanswered.
What about the language itself? What does Band 9 vocabulary actually look like?
It looks incredibly natural. For lexical resource, the examiner highlighted their use of highly sophisticated, precise phrasing. They used terms like viable solution, environmentally friendly, and discussed the negative repercussions of policy changes. It wasn't forced. It fit the academic context perfectly. For coherence and cohesion, the examiner explicitly referenced the rubric, noting that the writer's cohesion attracts no attention. There it is again, invisible cohesion. Every paragraph had a sharply defined central idea that flowed effortlessly into the next.
It sounds flawless.
This raises an important question, though, and it's something every candidate needs to understand about the Band 9 standard. Does a Band 9 mean absolute, clinical, robotic perfection? The answer, surprisingly, is no.
Really? I would assume a 9 means 0 errors whatsoever.
That's the myth. In this flawless Band 9 model essay, the examiner actively noted a typographical error. The writer accidentally typed benefit from taxes instead of benefit from taxes. They transposed the R and the O, yet they still received a Band 9 for lexical resource and grammar.
That is wild. How does a spelling error survive in a Band 9?
Because the rubric allows for human nature. A Band 9 evaluates expert, natural control of the language. The specific wording in the Band 9 descriptors allows for rare minor errors that occur only as slips. The examiner looked at the overwhelming evidence of sophisticated, flawless English throughout the rest of the 300 words, and correctly deduced that form instead of from was not a gap in the candidate's vocabulary or spelling knowledge. It was a mere slip of the finger under time pressure. The test rewards genuine, masterful communication over clinical, computerized perfection. Human error does not disqualify you from the highest possible score, provided your overall command demonstrates true expertise.
That is incredibly encouraging. It strips away the paralyzing fear of making a single mistake and refocuses the goal on demonstrating overall mastery. As we wrap up this massive deep dive into the IELTS writing mechanics, it is vital to synthesize exactly what we've learned. The biggest takeaway for me is that IELTS writing is not merely an English test. It is fundamentally a test of executive function. It is a test of your ability to follow complex, multi-part instructions. It is a test of your ability to structure arguments logically and format them correctly. If you ignore the plural rules, if you forget your paragraph breaks, or if you panic and stray off topic to use a memorized essay, your advanced grammar and vocabulary will not save you from the examiner's strict grading ceiling.
That is the ultimate truth of the exam. You must approach the test with the examiner's rubric tattooed on the inside of your mind. You need to understand the positive features you're trying to display, yes. But more importantly, you must be hyper-vigilant about avoiding the negative features. The missing data, the off-tone phrases, the omitted bullet points, those are what will artificially limit your score.
Before we go, we want to leave you with a final concept to mull over on your own. We spent a lot of time analyzing the Band 9 standard of invisible cohesion. The idea that your linking words and transitions should be so natural, so perfectly integrated, that they attract absolutely no attention. The reader is just carried along by the argument. Take a moment to step outside the context of an IELTS exam. How might you apply this principle of invisible cohesion to your everyday professional life? Think about the emails you write to your boss or the presentation slides you build for a client meeting. Think about how often we rely on mechanical, clunky transition words in the workplace to sound professional. Pursuant to our previous conversation, furthermore, henceforth, how could refining the flow of your ideas using subtle referencing and clear paragraph structures make your own professional arguments more persuasive and less robotic? It's a linguistic skill that goes far beyond impressing an IELTS examiner. It's the foundation of compelling, influential communication in the real world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep refining your arguments, keep watching out for those ceilings, and we'll be here to unpack it all for you next time.